Jello or gelatin is a very nostalgic dessert in my house. However, we don't make it very often because the little halal packets are like $4 each, and that really adds up when you're trying to make it for a party. Also, the flavors are very limited, and so because of that, I was like, let me try to DIY that. It's actually ridiculously easy to make your own jello. You just need juice and gelatin. However, this isn't a real zeal video and I wanted to try out different things. I'm trying shelf-stable juice, refrigerated juice, and just trying to make my own juice. I want to point out there is one halal certified gelatin available to me and it's on Amazon. Like, what in the United States is this? So I'm starting off with the shelf-stable juice. This just means it is juice that sits on the shelf and doesn't actually need to be refrigerated. So I went ahead and grabbed a bowl. I am going to be doing single servings of each, but for that, I am going to use a cup of juice and then a tablespoon of gelatin. Now, the ratio really depends on how firm or jello-y you want your jello to be. So if you like a more jiggly jello, you're going to do less gelatin, and if you like more firm jello, then you'll add more. From my experimentation, I found that the range for the gelatin goes from 3/4 tablespoon, which is a very jiggly jello, to a tablespoon and a half for a more firm jello. So similar to the jello packets, you want to make sure that the liquid is hot. So I went ahead and microwaved the juice for about 2 minutes. And I know you're technically supposed to bloom gelatin. However, adding it straight in and mixing it worked for me. You're looking at my spoon and you're like, girl, how do you know that that is exactly a tablespoon? And in reality, I don't. It just goes back to that ratio. Anything between 3/4 to a tablespoon and a half is ideal. And I have found that this spoon makes the perfect jello texture for me. It's a matter of trial and error and trying to figure out what texture you like and how much gelatin is required to get it there. Now for the rest of the recipe, you just stir until the gelatin is completely dissolved, and then it just needs to chill in the fridge for a couple of hours. For the next experiment, I am using refrigerated juice, which is just this Minute Maid strawberry kiwi juice. I did want to see if fake or artificial kiwi would impact jello texture, because I know on the jello boxes they say, hey, don't use pineapple or kiwi as the enzymes in it will break down the gelatin. So I wanted to see if this would be true for this juice as well. I am going to be following the exact same steps as the one before. I did a cup of juice. I am going to then microwave it for 2 minutes. And then I'm going to add in my tablespoon of gelatin and then just work it in, making sure it is completely dissolved. And as I was doing that, I was noticing that the juice was starting to bubble, and I was like, I have never seen it do this. This is really interesting. I wonder if that was the enzymes, and this is my sign that this wasn't going to work. We'll find out soon because it's off to the fridge. Now, the third of these experiments is taking just frozen fruit, letting them thaw a little bit, chucking them into the blender, and then just using those to then squeeze out the juice to then make jello. I thought I would experiment with the flavors and use some strawberry and mango, so I went ahead and grabbed my blender, and now I'm just going to chuck in all of the fruit. I wasn't exact on how many fruits I put in there. I just put in a ton because I know that when you juice it, it ends up being a lot less juice than what you originally blended. I then went ahead and took this mixture off to the blender and blended it. After blending it, I looked at it and I was like, that looks like a delicious smoothie. Let's just stop here and let me enjoy it. Just kidding. I brought out the measuring cup and the bowl, and I went ahead and transferred the smoothie into a cheesecloth. Now, some of us have the luxury of a juicer, which would avoid all of the steps. However, I do not, as I usually drink smoothies and not fruit juice. So this is the process I use to just extract the juice from fruit, but I put it all into the cheesecloth, and then you will notice that that looks very much like a smoothie, aka it is frozen. It is freezing, and as I tried to squeeze the juice out, it was just way too cold for my hands. So I made the executive decision to just put it to the side and let it thaw a little bit while I cut some strawberries, because I decided, you know what, I want to add toppings to these jellos. The reasons why I wanted to do that was A, to test if the jello could handle fruit, and B, because just let this 90s baby enjoy a little bit of nostalgia of the fruit-filled jellos. It's nothing too fancy, it was just some strawberry slices, but I think the same rule of no pineapple, no kiwi applies to the fruit you add as well. I then brought out that semi-frozen, probably still completely frozen because it only took me like 3 minutes to cut up the strawberries, strawberries, but I went ahead and tried to squeeze out the juice again. And again, it was just way too frozen and too cold for my hands. You could see it started to emit a little bit of the juice, but it was all sticking to my hands. So I made the executive decision to just microwave it. And that was probably one of the best executive decisions I've ever made, because look at how much juice came out. So I went ahead and poured it into the measuring cup to just see how much I had gotten at this point. And then I just went back to squeezing what was left. My guesstimate on how many fruit I was going to need for this was kind of pretty spot on. I made almost a cup of juice and I was happy with that. So now I am going to add it into the bowl, take it to the microwave, heat it up, and then get on with the process. And obviously clean the disaster that I made when juicing. But I went ahead and added in my tablespoon of gelatin, and then I just stirred it in until it was completely dissolved. The one thing I do want to point out, which is very obvious, is that this is a very thick and not translucent liquid. It's obviously from the pectin in the fruit, so I did think it would have an impact, but I also realized, you know what, this is just straight up fruit. It has no sugar in it whatsoever, so let me add in some sugar because I know it compared to the fruit juices is going to be completely sour and I'm not going to enjoy it. So I just eyeballed how much sugar I would need and then stirred that in as well. Not gonna lie, my childish brain is looking at this and I'm like, this looks way too healthy to be jello. I need my jello to be translucent. However, this is an experiment, so I'm going to follow exact steps as the rest. Remember those strawberries I chopped up earlier? Yes, let's start to add them in. I did make all of these jellos right after each other, so they are still pretty liquid. So I'm just going to toss the strawberries in. Now, this is the most crucial step. You're going to try to make a pattern in the jello, and then as soon as you walk them to the fridge, it's going to completely get messed up. So you're looking at these and you're like, what the heck is the pattern you're trying to make? And I was trying to make the strawberries into little flower petals, like putting 5 all around. The first 2 already failed, but that third one was already thick to begin with, and I feel like this is probably the only success it'll have, but these guys are off to the fridge to chill for a couple of hours and then we'll taste test. The jellos are finally solidified and the first 2 look amazing, and that third one just it does not look like jello. It looks like it should be a soup or a porridge, but this is what they're looking like. They actually do look great. This one, I don't know, but I'm going to go ahead and taste test all of them. This one right here is the strawberry kiwi one, so the refrigerated juice. You can see that jiggle is phenomenal. It is jelloing and it tastes phenomenal. Now moving on to the second one, which is the shelf-stable tropical V8 juice. It also has a phenomenal texture. It is jelloing and the taste is also amazing. Both of the first one and the second one just taste like the juice but jello version, so obviously they're gonna taste good as long as the juice tastes good. I then mustered up the courage to eat that third one. I'm not gonna call it jello because that just does not look like jello, but as soon as I put my spoon in there, I think the gelatin mixed with the pectin from the fruit to just make it this weird texture. But then I went ahead and taste tested it. For science. I was a brave little scientist that day because that texture was, ugh. It was definitely very thick. I thought it resembled a gummy bear or like at least something a lot thicker than jello. I'm a textures person, so it was very off-putting for me. However, my dad really did like it and loved that it was a healthier version. And so if you're looking for a healthy alternative and don't really mind textures, that third one would be perfect for you. So ranking the jellos, that third one was a 0 for me, but the other 2 were 10s and reminded me of the jello you'd get from the store. Making these sparked some more jello experiments, so let's test them. Gelatin mix usually comes in a powder form. So in my head, I was like, why not use a powder mix to make it? So I went ahead and got my tablespoon of gelatin, mixed it into boiling water, and once that was dissolved, I added in the drink mix. Now, common sense would have made it so that I would read the instructions and then realize, that mix is for a whole bottle of water, not just a cup. However, I did pour in that whole packet, which is why it is such a vibrant red. Once it was fully dissolved, I went ahead and tossed it into the fridge. And now that it's solidified, let's taste test. You can see that that is a jiggly jello. And for this one, I was feeling a little risky. I was like, you know what? Let me try to take it out of the bowl and flip it. I know this isn't a silicone bowl and I didn't like pre-grease or anything like that. So I didn't have high hopes, but I'm a little delusional and I wanted to try it anyways. I mean, with scraping the sides, I had already ruined it. So even if it had come out, it would have looked ugly. But yeah, it's stayed put in the bowl and I did try going a little deeper, and then I was like, you know what? This is not happening. So let me taste test it like a normal person. I grabbed my spoon, I grabbed a bite. Look at that jiggle. That is a perfect jello. It's got a beautiful color, beautiful jiggle. I went ahead and tasted it and it was phenomenal. Again, I put the whole packet, so it was very flavorful, but this packet was a little sour. So it was like a sour jello, and honestly, I'm obsessed with how flavorful it is. This is probably my favorite, but I've got one more experiment. We're gonna start this one off with a fail. I don't know where my footage went of me putting all of the fruit in, but these are just the strawberry mangoes that I used in the blended version as well. I just tossed them into a pot and I'm just going to boil them down until they reduce into a juice. What am I, Dr. Seuss? What are these rhymes? Okay, I'll stop there. Getting back to this, I let it reduce for about half an hour and it actually did become a pretty thick juice. It was so thick that I started to add the pot's lid on top. That way it didn't reduce into a syrup. However, we'll see in a second that it did. But once it was a juice, I went ahead and took it over to my experiment station. Now that this has had time to cool, you can see that it's no longer juice, but more on the way towards jam, which I'm going to solve for by just adding in more water. But first I wanted to make sure to filter out all of the seeds and the lumps, so I'm just going to put all of the juice through a metal sieve. I clearly didn't wait long enough to let it cool properly, which is why the steam is just going to mess with the autofocus, but I am just going to use a fork to just push it through the sieve to get all of the clumps. I repeated that for the whole mixture, and once I was done, you could see that there was definitely not a cup of juice or jam or whatever you want to call this mixture, which is where I went in and added in the water. I was feeling risky again, which is why I didn't measure it, but what I should have done was poured the juice into the measuring cup and then added water into that until it hit a cup. Luckily, because I've done this so many times, I could eyeball it and it worked out perfectly. Now the juice is still scalding, so I went ahead and added it into the bowl, and then I am going to add the gelatin into there and give it a mix, and then it is off to the fridge to chill until it solidifies. After a couple of hours, it has finally solidified. This is what it's looking like, and it does look better than the blended version. It is at least a little more transparent. However, that texture, you know when you make a chicken dish and it has juice around it and then you put it in the fridge and it solidifies? That's this texture. Now, the texture is not great, and also the flavor is not great because I had a request to make a sugar-free version, which is what this one is, and it's just a no from me. For me, at least texture or flavor needs to be good for me to enjoy it. However, my family did like this one. Now, I am basing my favorites off of the ones that are the closest to the gelatin dessert that you would get from the store. Not whether or not they're healthy or good for you or whatever, that doesn't matter to me. I'm trying to eat jello. From the first three, the ones using the fruit juice definitely were the way to go, and the blended smoothie was an absolute no. This one was also an absolute no. However, it was better than the blended smoothie. This one right here using the drink mix was my favorite. It was so flavorful, it was a little sour, and it was just the most nostalgic. These are my rankings, and now I am off to enjoy my hard work and my good jello.